Hello everyone, welcome to the 7th week of interaction session for the course on advanced robotics. My name is Soumya and I am a PMRF fellow at IIT Gandhinagar. So since the last few weeks we have been mostly be dealing with kinematics and dynamics of the robot. So basically in the last class we saw that how what are the ways to solve the dynamics for a given system. So one of the main ways that we use was Lagrangian method, in which we basically used energy based concept. We have the kinetic energy, we have the potential energy, and from that we try to find out, okay, what are the dynamics from the system obtained for the system. Okay, the other method was, which was basically mass into acceleration approach, that was using the Newton's method of doing so, Newton's Euler method basically. So we are already well versed with that. But what if a robot has to follow a certain trajectory? Let's say it already has an end effector position at some point, at some arbitrary point, and then it has to move to some other arbitrary point. Then what is a mechanism it should use? Should the end effector just move to that point, or should the joint angles basically be given a trajectory to move? So that is a question that we are basically going to answer today. And you have already seen the lectures for this topic. I hope you have already seen and completed it. So when you saw all of those lectures, you might have seen you. So this week you have the lectures on trajectory planning. You have the lectures on sensors and actuators, right? In all of these lectures, you might have seen that whatever we studied till now we are building on it. Everything that will be building on it will be helpful in the next few lectures, where we'll be dealing with bipeds and grasping and many other topics. Okay. So today will be a work on exercise kind of thing for questions related to trajectory planning and sensors and actuators. Once we are done with the problems, then we'll see MATLAB problems for doing so. So I know it is not discussed in the lecture by Professor Ashish, but if you are aware of minimum acceleration trajectory or minimum jerk trajectory, so all those things we are going to consider now. Okay, so let's move ahead with the first question. Okay, so the first question is, a trajectory plan is the time history of, is it the time history of position and acceleration, or the time history of position, velocity and acceleration, or angle of joint, or end effector configuration? So what is essentially trajectory planning? What do you understand from trajectory planning? I want to know your perspective on this. Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's. I want a very basic answer to it. What you have understood from this trajectory planning? Any guesses on the answer of this question?
It is just a plan in which direction the robot will move.
Okay, the direction in which robot will move. So it is not a very precise answer. I mean, it is somewhat that you can explain in layman terms, but let's talk more technically on this. Okay, so I'll be briefing you on what it is and then let's proceed with it. Okay, so trajectory plan we are dealing with in robotics. So let's not consider about any other trajectory for now. Okay, it basically represents the time history of a moving object. Typically, it describes the position, velocity, and acceleration change over the time. All right. So the main thing associated with it is definitely not jerk. It's just position, velocity, and acceleration. Okay. So I'll just yeah. 2. Okay. Deals with position, velocity, and acceleration change with time. All right. So it is basically a history of position, velocity of and acceleration change over the time. So it is basically used to ensure smooth motion planning and control of a robotic system. Okay. So smooth motion planning and control. Okay. What is meant by smooth motion planning? कि अगर रोबोट का एक जगह पर एंड इफेक्टर है and it has to move at some other point, the motion should not be much accelerated or deaccelerated. You should not have a change in acceleration being experienced. So essentially, there should not be so much vibration in the robot when it moves from one position to other. Or it should not have a very jerky behavior in which it is often changing the acceleration and then you have abhi chala ruk gaya and then again it starts, it stops. You know, it can lead to damage of the system. So that should not happen essentially. Okay. The second thing is control of the system. So I hope all of you have taken the course on control system for now. So we want to have a control on the system. Control means agar end effector is placed at an angle of 30 degree, let's say from the base, then if it, let's say it is a single link robot only, and if the link is placed at 30 degree from the base, then it has to move at, let's say, angle of 60 degree. So if it moves there, how do we ensure that it has stopped at 60 degree? How do we make sure that it is having least deviation from the angle that we want? So all of those properties or the parameters which help us basically to drive the robot from some initial position to desired position properly in a controlled manner is driven by control system. All right. So we'll touch more questions upon this. I hope you know PID controller, at least this is the very basic. So yeah, that is really important. But anyway, I'll be discussing the very simple architecture for control. All right. So yeah, trajectory plan is the time history of position, velocity and acceleration is the correct answer. It would definitely it would not be just position and acceleration because it omits velocity, and velocity is really crucial component of trajectory planning. Without velocity, we cannot fully describe the motion transitions between position, right? Velocity is essential because it would be incomplete information. All right. Then the third option is angle of joint. This is incorrect because when joint angles are part of motion planning, a trajectory is not about angles, right? Joint angles की ज़रूरत है motion planning करने में कि कहाँ से कहाँ जाना है करने में, but trajectory is not just about angles, it's about all the position, velocity and how we are reaching. And the last option is end effector configuration. This is incorrect because end effector configurations refers to basically the final pose, the position and orientation of the robotic end effector, not the full motion history, right? It is not a plan, it is just a final position. So a trajectory plan describes how the robot moves continuously over time, not just where the end effector ends up. All right. So yeah, that is why the correct answer is position, velocity and acceleration. I hope this is clear. If there is no question on this, then we can move to the second question. Okay. All right. So the trajectory planning for a serial arm manipulator is done in end effector space, C space. C space means, what is meant by C space? It is configuration space. Okay. Then joint space and then none of the above. These are the four options we have. So I hope you have already seen the lecture, and from there it should be well clear that the answer is what. But anyway, so let's go through all the options one by one. If you have the answer with you, I think you can tell me the answer. If you don't, you can guess on the answers. I mean, try to be logical or have some insight behind what you think is the correct answer. That is all I want. So, any guesses for this answer?
Is it C space?
No, it is not C space. Okay, so the correct answer is joint space. Let me be clear, what are these spaces before that? When you have, uh, just a second. First of all, we should be clear with two things. One is end effector space. End effector space is also called Cartesian space. Okay? Cartesian space is basically the representation of the uh, pose of the end effector, basically the position and orientation of the end effector. So it is basically x, y and theta. Alright, this is your end effector space. Then the other thing is joint space. Okay, this joint space basically consists of the all the joint angles theta 1, theta 2, etc. Let's not have theta here, it should just be xy. Yeah, all the thetas occur in joint space. Now, the trajectory planning of a serial arm manipulator, let's say if it is a 2-arm manipulator, okay? If it is a 2-arm manipulator having the end effector here, then okay, this is your 2-arm manipulator. Then the end effector position is given by xy, and this theta 1 and theta 2 are the joint space parameters. Now, if we are supposed to plan a trajectory for this serial arm manipulator, then where would we plan? So one thing is, let me draw this once again. Let's say this is your robot. Okay, this is one of your configurations. Now, let's say there is another configuration of the robot in which it comes at this position. Okay, then there is another configuration of your robot in which it comes at this position. So all of these are different configurations of your robot. Okay, now, so let's say my robot initial position is given by this, and let's say this is my final position that I want. All right, then what should I do? One way is I do the inverse kinematics here, okay, and find out what are the joint angles. Then I do inverse kinematics here and find out what are the final joint angles. Once I have the initial joint angles, once I have the final joint angles, I can fit a curve and say, okay, my joint should move from here to here following this trajectory, right? The other way is I plan some motion for the end effector only, saying that my end effector position is xy. I want my end effector to go to this position x2, y2. Then how do I go? Let's say I say that I want to follow a straight line trajectory. Okay. So if I follow the straight line trajectory, I would be able to go from this initial position to this final position. So what would happen there? At each instant of time, you will have to use inverse kinematics, right? Let's say for first instant, you are here. Okay. You find out what are the, by using the inverse kinematics, you find out what are the angles of each of the arms. Once you find out what are the angles, you move a little in another direction and then again calculate the thetas. So in this way you can go on till you find out what is the theta we required and then we have reached. Or you put a controller over this which basically takes any action just to maintain on this line whatever angle comes here. So these are the two basic approaches that I used. Okay. So the trajectory planning for a serial arm manipulator is done using. When I told you the second approach, in which we'll just follow this path, the end effector path, and try to keep the end effector on this path, and then say that okay, I have reached my desired point. It is end effector space. Okay. The other approach that I am talking about is I find the inverse kinematics here. I find the inverse kinematics here. I get the initial joint angles and final joint angles in both the cases, and then I interpolate what should be the angle in between to reach that particular desired angle is given by this joint space. All right, and this is configuration space. So I'll talk. So what we usually do is joint space. Now there are reasons for it. There are some pros for it because we want why we want to go with joint space, and it has its own pros. So I'll tell you that. But before that, it is not end effector space. End effector space basically, or the Cartesian space, represents the robot's motion in terms of position and orientation of the end effector, right? So trajectory planning is usually done in joint space first, and then we go for then it is transformed to Cartesian space using forward kinematics. So leave that aspect. I'll tell you why we go for joint kinematics, but it is not end effector space definitely. Okay. Let's see the second option. Configuration space represents the possible joint positions of the robots. Okay. It is more of a concept used for motion planning rather than explicit trajectory planning. What I mean is, let's say, basically I want to know what is the position. I'm not much worried about the angles. I just want to know what are the joint positions of the robot, and it is used in motion planning. That okay, my robot should stay within this, not workspace kind of thing, but configuration spaces. Uh, uh, Not motion planning, right? So we usually use the concept of configuration space where we want to ensure collision free paths using configuration space. So it has nothing to do with trajectory planning. Okay, so the correct option is joint space. Now, before telling you why should we or moving to any question ahead, let's work on this. Okay, so trajectory planning for a serial arm manipulator is done in joint space, right? And why it is done? So there are a couple of reasons for that. I'll be telling you one by one. First of all, I'm answering the question 2. Why trajectory planning for a serial arm manipulator is done in joint space. All right, this is the question we are answering. The very first and basic reason is we have direct control of actuators here. What are actuators? Any motor that you are using in your robot is your actuator, basically, which converts your electrical energy to mechanical energy is your actuator. So in our robots, essentially all the motors that we are using are actuators. All right. So in this case, for direct control of actuators, it's like joint space planning controls individual joint angles, right, rather than end effector positions. Since robot actuators operate in joint space, क्योंकि it is independent joint control, right? Every joint is controlling every link independently. So you need a proper controller. Now the controller can be used directly for actuators. So it is more natural and efficient to generate motion in this space. The second very important thing, and that is also covered in your this lecture, is we want to avoid any kind of kinematic singularities. What is meant by this? Singularities occur in Cartesian space, right? You remember this. if my end effector position is like this, my workspace is limited by this, then my end effector, if it goes in this configuration, it is in singular configuration. You can just move in this direction, but you cannot move in this direction, right? So, singularities occur in Cartesian space where certain motions become impossible or require infinite joint velocities, right? In joint space, the manipulator follows a smooth, well-defined path without encountering these issues. That is why we want to avoid kinematic singularities and control in joint space. Okay? Now, the other possible reason is computational simplicity. Okay. So what happens is, in joint space, we only need to compute and interpolate joint velocities, positions and accelerations. Cartesian space planning requires inverse kinematics at every time steps. I told you, right? At every step, we'll have to calculate inverse kinematics and get the joint angles, which can be complex and computationally expensive. So that is a problem. Also, yeah. The other reason is we want to ensure smooth motion and feasibility. Okay. So joint space allows for smooth interpolation using polynomials like cubic, quintic, minimum jerk or splines. Directly planning in Cartesian space may result in erratic joint movements, which I said, बहुत jerky movement हो सकता है, or it could be very erratic kind of movement due to inverse kinematics computation. And you might have already seen that inverse kinematics does not have a unique solution. So if it does not, or this for a 2-hour manipulator, this configuration and this configuration both are possible, right? So it is not a unique solution. So that really brings you to non-smooth motion and non-feasible motion sometimes. Okay? Last one thing is, we want to avoid unexpected joint limits. Okay. So a serial manipulator has joint limits, right? Maximum rotation angle, maximum velocity, etc. उसके बाद वो टूट जाएगा. Joint space planning respects these limits directly, while Cartesian planning may result in unrealistic or infeasible joint configurations. So that is also one of the problems. Okay. Other thing is, if we want to reduce the risk of collisions. In joint space, the manipulator avoids unexpected obstacles that might arise from poorly optimized inverse kinematic solution in Cartesian space. Motion is more predictable and collision free when planned in joint space. Okay, let's say if your robot is like this in this particular configuration as of now. Okay, and then you have said that you want to ban this place because you have some obstacle over here, and then you want to reach this place. This is the new configuration of robot. Okay, you want it to reach in this way. It could happen na, that this end effector would somehow come here and then it would move here, because you do not have any control on the joint angles. You just have a control on the movement of end effector. That creates problem a number of times. So it is, if you want to like have collision free path planning, then you can go for this. You have to go for joint space. And for hardware and controller compatibility, robot controllers natively operate in joint space, right? So most industrial robots receive joint trajectories and input as inputs and use internal controllers for execution. Okay, so it is already built in industry like that. So the basic thing is, Cartesian space planning is used sometimes, but it is used when task space constraints are crucial. For example, you want to keep a tool aligned with a surface. In that case, you use it. Or when you want to use visual or some real-time adaptation of the end effector trajectory, then you use. Or when you want to do some precise manipulation in some structured environment, then you use. Else, every time we go for joint space trajectory planning. I hope all of this makes sense. That why do we do that? If there is any question, please let me know. No question, then I'll move ahead. But yeah, this is the reason you should be familiar that we don't directly plan that trajectory saying that, okay, this is my x1, y1 position of the end effector currently and I want to go to this x2, y2 position of the end effector and I try to fit a curve there. No, we don't do that. We actually do that in joint space. Let's say this is my joint angle as of now and there is some desired joint angle and then I want to fit a curve that takes my joint angle from a position to a desired position. That is the way in which we proceed. All right. All right. So let's go ahead with the third question. Okay. A cubic spline is often used to model the trajectory of a manipulator. To find the constants of the cubic splines, how many constraints are required? This is your question, right? So, what is a cubic spline? Cubic spline is a third order polynomial. Third degree, sorry. And what is the form of this polynomial? ST is, sorry, A0 plus A1t plus A2t square plus A3 t cube. So, how many unknowns are there? Can anyone answer this question? If it is a cubic spline and I have this equation of the form, how many polynomials are there? How many unknowns are there? And why it is used to, there is some reason why we go for modeling the trajectory of a manipulator using cubic splines. So that is another story. Before that, so, okay, I'll give you the answer. So what are my unknowns here? I want to fit a trajectory, right? So I want to say that, let's say, this is my single link end effector. Okay, once it is here, once it is here, let's say it is an angle of 30 degree here and it is an angle of 80 degrees over here. Then I want to go from 30 degree to 80 degree. Then I want to plan a trajectory. So trajectory planning is basically on this angle, that my angle from 30 degree has to reach to 80 degree. It is not that this is my x1, y1 coordinate and I want to go to x2, y2 coordinate. I'm not doing that. If my question would have asked that, okay, this is your x1, y1 and this is your x2, y2, go from here to here, what I would do, I would take x1, y1, compute the joint angle using inverse kinematics, and then for the final position, again for x2, y2, I would compute the angle required using inverse kinematics and then plan a trajectory. That is what I would do if I were given just the end effector positions. But in this case, I'm not given the end effector positions. I'm directly it's one step eased. So I have been given two joint angles. And if I have been given two joint angles, one of them is the initial angles and one of them is the final angle, and I want to reach from one of them to the other, what would we do? So we'll try to fit a trajectory plan that would take my angle from here to here. And that is done using third degree polynomial often. There is a reason behind it, but let's stick to this question first. Okay, so when I want to fit a curve to it, what I would do कि अगर यहाँ पे मेरा theta 1 है, यहाँ पे मेरा theta 2 है, I want to go from theta 1 to theta 2, so there should be a way which guides me through it, right? And it should be dependent on time. Okay, so what I would basically want to find out, all of these coefficients are unknown. Okay, when I know these coefficients, then I would know, okay, if this is my initial position, this would be my final position if I follow this trajectory over the time. That would help me know. But, excuse me, I would definitely know that if this is because this is a time dependent equation, all right, and we are supposed to find out this polynomial only. But what are the if this is your cubic spline, and then if we are supposed to find out uh, to find the constants of to find the constants of the cubic spline, how many constants are equal? So four unknowns are there with us, right? These are the four unknowns: a naught, a1, a2 and a3. These are the four unknowns that we have. So definitely we need four equations. Four equations will come from where? It would come from four constraints. So the answer to this question, that is why, is four constraint. It is not three constraint because cubic polynomial has four unknowns, and three constraints are not enough to solve for all coefficients. Not two constraints because they are insufficient, because we need at least four, and not five. Five would be overfitting, right? So five is like we just want four unknown, four coefficients, and adding a fifth constraint would make the system overdetermined. I know what is. I hope you know what is an overdetermined system. When you have like more constraints than what is required, so you might not get a unique solution. Okay, so since a cubic spline has four unknown coefficients, exactly four constraints are needed to determine them uniquely, right? Okay, I hope this question is clear. If there is any doubt, I would take a pause. Please let me know. All right. Okay. A single joint robot arm is moving from 0 degree to 90 degree in 5 seconds, starting at rest and stopping at rest. Okay. Uh, we need to fit a cubic polynomial and find the third coefficient a2 corresponding to the term a2t square in this polynomial only. So let's start. So it's 0 to 90 degree in 5 seconds. Starting and stopping at rest would help me get two more constraints. So I'll get two constraints from here. I'll get two constraints from here, right? And cubic spline has four unknown coefficients. I have already got four constraints. I'll fit them and get the answer. So let's work on it. I hope everyone is sitting with pen and paper. Please start solving the question, okay? Okay, let's say first I'll write this. Given by a naught plus a1 t plus a2 t square plus a3 t cube. All right. Robot starts at rest and stops at rest. So we'll first have four constraints written with us. Initial position is okay. Theta at 5 is equal to 90, right? Then the third is for initial velocity, because the robot starts and stops at rest. Theta dash 0 is equal to 0. And 4, sorry, okay, these are the four constraints, right? Now we want to solve for all these four coefficients. Let's go with it. These are very important constraints. They would only help me in finding out the solution. Okay. So since theta 0 is equal to 0, that means if I, so I'll write for the first time and then we'll continue. So theta 0 is 0. We'll figure out the first constraint first. Which means 0 is equal to a naught, because you put t is equal to 0 at all the places. From here you'll get a naught is equal to 0. So we have already got the first equation, right? Now what we should do after this, we should basically since the velocity at 0 is equal to is 0 at t is equal to 0, we should differentiate it. Okay, so theta dash t is equal to a1 plus 2a2t plus 3a3t square, right? Theta dash 0 is equal to 0. This we already have, right? So from here what we can do? We can try to find out what is a1. What will be a1? 0 is equal to a1. So this is the second equation that we have. So from here we know at least this much, that my theta t does not have a naught and a1 term. So it is just a2t square plus a3t cube. This is at least known to us by now. Okay, now let's move to the, so this constraint is done, this constraint is done. Okay, let's move to the second constraint, in which our final position is 90 at 5 seconds. Okay, so theta 5 is equal to 90. This is all we know. So 90 is equal to a2 into 5 square plus a3 into 5 cube. So 90 is given by 25a2 plus 125a3. This is correct, right? So this is the third equation that we have. Let me number all of them. This is first, this is second, this is the third equation that we have. Let's work on this fourth one. Theta dash 5 is equal to 0, which means 0 is equal to 2a2 into 5 plus 3a3 into 5 square, right? If you differentiate this equation, what you'll get? This only. So from here you can write 10a2 plus 75a3 is equal to 0. This is the fourth equation that we have. Solving 3 and 4, you'll get a2 to be of some value, a3 to be of some value. Can you solve the equation for me and tell me what is the answer? This is very simple. Oh, please solve. Has anyone got the answer? Has anyone got the answer? If not, I'll tell you the answer. Okay, I'll tell you the answer. So
Ma'am,
your
what is A3? Is it less than 1?
no, A3 is not less than 1. Okay, you're not asking the absolute value, right? What is your value that you've got? Yeah, it is less than 1. It is even less than 0.
0.288?
No, it should be minus 1.44. This should be your value. And then you'll get A2 to be equal to 10.8. I think you've made some calculation mistake.
Yes, ma'am. I didn't put one negative, that's why.
Okay. Okay, so from here, the correct answer is 10.8, right? We just wanted to know what is A2 corresponding to this term. So I hope this way of trajectory planning is clear. So you've understood if there is just a single joint robot and it is supposed to move from 0 degree to 90 degree in 5 seconds, in what way you're going to fit the polynomial. My point is, with the given conditions, with this question, the given condition, you cannot go with a polynomial less than of degree 3. You won't be able to go. You can try. You can what you can do is you start with a very you start with linear polynomial, kind of taking it to be, let's say, theta t is equal to a naught plus a1 t. Okay, see why this won't work for the given constraints. Whatever you want to do, you want to have an initial position, you want to have a position, final position, and then you also want to stay at rest at both the positions. Would that be possible with this? Okay, I'll just hint it. If your theta t is this, okay, what would be your theta dash t? It would be a1 only, right? That means you'll move with a constant velocity forever. Now, if you move with a constant velocity forever, it is never possible for you to end at rest position. You would definitely need some acceleration, right? It is not possible with this. Similarly, do one more do another thing. Now after this, try taking, so this fails, right? Take theta t to be a naught plus a1 t plus a2 t square. Okay, differentiate it. You'll get a1 plus a2 t. Okay, so now your velocity is changing with time. Your acceleration is a2. So it is single sign. That means तुम स्टार्ट करोगे जीरो वेलोसिटी पे एट रेस्ट पोजीशन एंड योर एक्सेलरेशन इज ऑलवेज पॉजिटिव. If it is always positive, how will you come to rest? So this is confirmed that, or this is always negative. It is either always positive or always negative. Again, this is a problem, right? If it is forever positive, forever negative, you won't be able to stop at the rest position. So you cannot even go with this. This also fails. So this first one we tried fail, second one we tried fail. That is why the minimum we need is to proceed with a cubic spline for the given conditions. Okay. This is the minimum requirement. I hope this is clear. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Let's move with the next question. So last question, 10.8 was correct, right? After this. When a cubic polynomial is used to represent the trajectory, then acceleration is not zero at. So when a cubic polynomial is used for trajectory planning, acceleration is not zero at what? So let's see what is happening. Let's take theta t to be a cubic polynomial, an arbitrary polynomial, a naught plus a1t plus a2t square plus a3t cube. Okay, what would be theta dash t? It would be a1 plus 2a2t plus 3a3t square. All right, this is my velocity, this is my acceleration. It would be 2a2 plus 6a3t. Now, my question says, when a cubic polynomial is used to represent a trajectory, then the acceleration is not zero at. Acceleration is not zero at what time? When can we take the guarantee for this? So, if we take the first option, at start, I put t is equal to 0, then also acceleration will at least remain 2a2. Okay. Unless we have some additional constraints and we have some situation in which a2 is equal to 0. That is another story. We don't have any additional constraint as of now. Okay. So, acceleration is not necessarily 0 at start. This is for sure. Let's check about stop. Let's say it is t is equal to 10 seconds. Then also it is not 0. Right? But how about middle? Okay, let's be clear with this first. Unless or acceleration is not necessarily 0 unless additional constraints are imposed. This cubic polynomial that we are using, the cubic spline only ensures that the position and velocity are continuous and satisfy given conditions at start and stop, but not necessarily acceleration. Okay, the acceleration may be non-zero both at the start and stop positions. Now, the other options are middle, stop and start. Let's go with middle. At the midpoint of the trajectory, acceleration depends on the coefficients but is not guaranteed to be non-zero or zero. Okay, for stop, acceleration is not necessarily zero only at the stop position, because it can be zero both, non-zero both at start and stop. That is why. So when this is more correct, why would we even see this? But for middle it can be, uh, it depends on coefficients and it is not guaranteed. It is not guaranteed to be anything. Okay. So start and stop is a correct. So with a cubic polynomial trajectory, acceleration is generally non-zero at both the start and stop position unless explicitly constrained to be zero. If you want to explicitly constrain it to be zero, use a higher order polynomial. Okay. We'll see minimum jerk trajectory for MATLAB problem. We'll see there that why we need fifth order polynomial. Sorry, fourth order. Okay. Now,
Ma'am, shall I ask you a doubt?
yeah.
Ma'am, if the question is like, what is the practical problem of using a, cubic polynomial to represent a trajectories? Because the it does not ensures the acceleration is not zero at start and stop. Is it the answer?
Can you repeat the question and the option? Your voice was a bit not clear in between to me.
The practical problem of using a cubic polynomial to
Yeah.
represent a trajectory is that
Mm-hmm.
the acceleration is not zero at the start and stop.
Mm-hmm.
Acceleration is zero at the start and stop. The acceleration has constant value throughout the motion. There is discontinuity in velocity.
The practical problem associated with using cubic spline you want to ask.
Yeah, ma'am.
The only constraint that we put here is that acceleration is uh, not zero at start and stop. We are not putting this constraint.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the answer.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, so let's move. Okay. The basic definition of a sensor or actuator is it does what? So, the first option is it controls a motor. Second option is it converts energy from one form to another, or it senses data, or it actuates a motor. So it is asking a general definition, right? So it should fit both sensor and actuator. So most of the options actually define either sensor or actuator. It does not define both. So any answer to this question?
It converts energy from one form to another.
Yeah, right. Very good. So it converts energy from one form to another. So a sensor or an actuator fundamentally converts energy from one form to another to either sense the environment or produce the motion. If it is sensing the environment, it is a sensor. If it is like producing a motion in the environment, it is an actuator. Now, sensors basically convert physical stimuli, which can be, for example, light, temperature, etc., into electrical signals. Okay, actuators convert electrical signals to mechanical signals. Mechanical motion basically, not signals. Or another physical output. So, like driving a motor. So, since both sensors and actuators involve some form of energy conversion, this definition applies to both. So, the first option was it controls a motor, while actuators really control motors. The definition of a sensor or actuator is broader than just a motor control. For census data, this is only partially correct because only sensors sense data, but actuators do not. So this question asks for a definition that covers both sensors and actuators, right? And one is actuates the motor. This only describes actuators and not sensors. Sensors do not actuate motors, they just measure the environment, right? So your answer is converts energy from one form to another. Okay. Okay, I hope this is also clear now. Oh, we have NAND and NOR and XOR gate here. Okay, two incremental encoders can be used in parallel. If you've seen the lecture, you might remember the parallel uses of an encoder, because just one of them actually creates a problem, because you have limited amount of space to put limited number of gaps through which the light can pass, and yeah, you won't be able to achieve a very small position. Like you want to calculate two very 0.00001 degrees, won't be able to do if you don't have a very high precision encoder. So two incremental encoders can be used in parallel to increase the angular resolution of position measurement along with a NAND gate, AND gate, NOR gate, XOR gate. Any idea? What is the truth table of this gate?
XOR gate.
Yeah, XOR gate is the correct answer. And yeah, I'll explain why. So, let's go with the truth table of XOR gate. Let's say my signal is can anyone tell me what are the outputs?
One,
One in this case,
0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
are you sure about it? It is XOR, it is not just OR gate. At least two should be 1 and two should be 0, na?
Yes, ma'am.
What? Which one is 1?
Second and third should be 1.
Right, right. So I'll tell you what is how to remember this. For XOR gate, na, it is basically addition of the inputs 0 A and B. So the best way to remember is this: addition of 0 plus 0, it is 0. Addition of 0 1 is 1. Addition of 1 0 is 1, and addition of 1 1 is basically 1 0. Right? When you do the binary addition, it becomes 0, and then you have a carry over here and it becomes 1. So this 0 is retained. So what happens when you have similar inputs in just when you have similar inputs in this case and in this case, you get the output to be 0. When you have dissimilar inputs, you get the outputs to be 1. This is the advantage of using XOR gate. Okay, now So incremental encoders generate two quadrature signals. A and B, right? Which are 90 degrees out of phase. So basically what happens, using an XOR gate on these signals allows edge detection. So what happens it is, incremental encoder detects four states per cycle, क्योंकि 90 डिग्री का डिफरेंस है. So you basically get to find what is the difference between two different layers of encoders going on. Four states per cycle. Basically, the rising and falling edges of A and B are detected. So what happens? XOR logic, what essentially does on a broader scale, XOR gate allows finer detection of transitions improving precision. Okay. So NAND gate would not help, right? Because won't provide the correct pulse output needed for resolution enhancement. It would not detect correct transition every time, because the truth table is not of that kind in which if there is any change in one of the signals, it detects a pulse. No, it is not. And gate is also not like that, because it gives you an output of 1 only when both of the inputs are 1 and 1. So when the transition goes from 0 1 or 1 0, it does not detect. NOR gate also does not, because it also does not have a truth table of this kind in which if both of them are like different, you get a pulse. So by using an XOR gate, the number of detectable edges per cycle doubles, leading to a higher resolution in position measurement. That is why we have read that we use XOR gate. Okay. Now, okay, this is a very conceptual question. A Hall, or factual question basically. A Hall effect sensor detects a ferromagnetic material in front of it by detecting the changes in what? So it is an Hall effect sensor. It works on what? EMF force, potential field, or magnetic lines of force. What is the answer to this question?
Magnetic lines of force.
Right. Very good. So, yeah, Hall effect sensors basically work on the principle of Hall effect, where what happens here? Where a voltage is generated when a magnetic field is applied perpendicular to an electric current. Okay. So this is the, when a voltage is generated, where a voltage is generated when a magnetic field is applied perpendicular to an electric current. So what happens here? When a ferromagnetic object is placed near the sensor, what it does? It distorts the magnetic field, right? It distorts the magnetic field, causing a detectable change in the Hall voltage. Okay, this change basically allows the sensor to determine the presence, position or motion of the object, right? This is what happens in the case of Hall effect sensor. So yeah, the first option is magnetic light nerve force. This is definitely correct. Why not EMF? Because while the Hall effect sensor or this Hall effect principle involves a voltage difference, the sensor does not detect EMF directly. It detects a change in magnetic field which indirectly affects the voltage. So it is not related to EMF. Why not force? Because Hall effect does not measure force. It measures the magnetic field radiation. Mechanical forces are not involved in Hall effect sensing. And potential field. Potential field generally refers to electrical or gravitational potentials, right? Which are not directly relevant to Hall effect sensors. They basically works on the change in magnetic field. So yeah, it detects a change in magnetic field lines or the magnetic flux density to identify the presence of ferromagnetic objects. That is why your correct answer is option number A. Okay. Now, okay. Yeah. The force or torque measured by a force torque sensor always has some error because voltage cannot be exactly measured, gain matrix is non-square, current measurement is not accurate, and there is some error in strain gauge. So you know very well, right, that force and torque sensors basically measure the strain. It does not directly measure the force. It rather measures the effect of the force, which is given by strain. Okay. So yeah. So force torque sensors typically use strain gauges, and error in strain gauges can lead to inaccuracies in force or torque measurements. So I would say that this is one of the correct options, but based on what has been taught to you, something else has also been taught, and I think one of the other options can also be correct. So let's go first why I would say error in strain gauges is the correct answer. So strain gauges measure the deformation of a material when a force or torque is applied on it, right? So errors can occur due to some temperature variation or some hysteresis effect in the material or some calibration drift over the time. I'll write. I think I should write this. So if I am like voting for this option, what I would say, it can happen due to temperature variations. It can happen due to hysteresis effects. It can happen due to uh, calibration drift, and it can happen into, let's say, some noise, but this can happen with almost all the sensor. It is not something very specific to this force sensor only. So what else can go wrong with force sensor? But before that, in this case, since strain gauges are the core sensing element in most force torque sensors, their errors directly affect the measurement accuracy, right? So one of the options is voltage cannot be exactly measured. It is not correct. Why this is not the correct option? Because while precise voltage measurement is a challenge, modern ADCs, analog to digital converters, actually achieve high precision. So that's not a very big problem, right? So the primary source of error in force torque sensing is from the strain gauge or some other thing, but not from voltage measurement. Okay. Then the option is current measurement is not accurate. So forced torque sensors do not measure the current, right? They measure the strain. So anyway, we do not need current. So current measurement inaccuracies are more relevant in motor control and not in force sensing. So from here we can deduce that okay, error in strain gauge is correct. But one of the other options is also remaining, that gain matrix is non-square. Now let's move to this answer. And I would say if these four options are given, this is the correct answer. If this option was not present, this would have been the correct answer. But this happens with almost all the sensors, whichever would use strain gauge. Or, I mean, अगर current sensor use कर रहे हैं and then we say that why it is not able to measure correct current over the time, then these four can be the options always. So error can be in the quantity that is being measured. So that is another thing. Let's move to this gain matrix is non-square. Why this is the correct option? So okay. So you've already read about uh, multi-axis force or torque sensors, right? So why gain matrix is not square? So in these type of sensors, what happens? The output voltages from strain gauges are mapped to forces and torques using a transformation matrix, which is also known as gain matrix. Okay. So this gain matrix relates the sensor readings, whatever we are getting, which basically the voltages applied forces and torques. It basically finds a relation between them. So if the gain matrix is non-square, that is it has more inputs than outputs or vice versa, then only it will be non-square, right? What happens? The system is overdetermined or underdetermined. Underdetermined, okay, leading to calculation errors. Also, it affects the accuracy of force torque estimation. So, in high dimensional force or torque sensors, error basically arises due to inconsistent or non-square gain matrix. Okay, so yeah, In high precision, multi-axis force or torque sensors, the gain matrix issue can indeed be a primary reason for error. So if the context is multi-axis force torque sensor, then gain matrix is non-square is a valid and correct answer. If discussing general force torque sensors, error in strain gauges is a more common cause of error. Okay, so this answer makes sense for complex force torque sensors where the transformation from voltage to force is affected by matrix properties. That is why this is also the correct answer. I hope this makes sense. Let this sink in properly. Okay. An ultrasonic sensor very often does not detect objects in front of it. You might have already used ultrasonic sensor if you are doing some robotics. What type of objects are normally not detected by ultrasonic sensor? This is your question. Okay. So, uh, it's about ultrasonic sensor, right? So, how does it work? Any idea? What is the principle of working of ultrasonic sensors?
Ma'am, I haven't seen the lecture, but it will have a transmitter and a receiver, and it will send the ultrasonic waves. And when it is detected by the receiver, it will send back the signal.
Right. So basically it tries to find out in what time your sound wave has traveled. So, and based on that, it
Yeah.
tries to, you already know the speed and you know the time, then you can find, okay, at what distance my object is placed. So that is the working of ultrasonic sensor. Okay. So, ultrasonic sensors basically rely on sound wave reflections. Rely on sound wave reflections and uh, to detect the objects and yeah, so let's see what is the correct option. The first option is polished surfaces and red colored objects. Now, polished surface and red color objects, I mean, why would they get affected by color? It has nothing to do with color, right? It just has to do something with the speed of sound, and so it is not using light, it is using sound. So highly polished surfaces may cause reflections, but not so severely as they are not being affected by light. Okay, then the other option is hollow surfaces and wooden objects. Hollow objects can still reflect sound waves. Might be with some attenuation, but they will reflect. Wood generally reflects sound well, so it is usually detectable. The third option is flat surfaces and steel objects. Flat surfaces reflect sound waves directly back to the sensor, making them very easy to detect. Steel does not absorb any sound wave and it is easily detectable by ultrasonic sensor. Okay, so this is the fourth option, curved surfaces and materials that absorb sound waves. Now, so ultrasonic sensors basically emit high frequency sound waves and detect objects based on time it takes for the wave to bounce back. Okay. So, objects that do not reflect sound properly, for example, some curved surfaces or something that absorbs the sound, example, soft materials like foam or fabric, they can cause detection failures, right? So if there are curved surfaces, the sound waves may reflect in different directions instead of bouncing back to the sensor or to the receiver, as you said. It would not come back to the receiver, it would go somewhere else. That is a problem. This results in no detection or incorrect distance measurement. Then, if there are some sound absorbing materials like foam, rubber, or soft fabrics, they can absorb sound waves, preventing them from reflecting back. So this also causes sensor to fail to detect the object. That is why this is correct option. Okay. So yeah, so ultrasonic sensors struggle with curved surfaces, which scatter sound waves, and materials that absorb sound, which prevents reflection. Okay, these are the questions for today. Let's move to the MATLAB problem. So okay, our problem statement for today is there is a robotic arm which moves from an initial position which is 30° to a final position which is 90° in 5 seconds. This is a question that we were solving, right? The initial and final velocities are both 0. So we have 4 constraints already. So we'll be fitting a cubic polynomial trajectory to compute the trajectory parameters and plot the position, velocity and acceleration profiles. This is what we are going to do. Before that, so how we are going to do this is, we are going to use a cubic polynomial equation for trajectory planning. So we already saw this equation, right? A1 plus A2 A0 plus A1t plus A2t square plus A3t cube. The given conditions are theta 0 is 30°, theta at 5 seconds is 90°, theta dash at 0 is 0 because we want the robot to be at rest initially. Theta dash at 5 seconds is also 0 because we want final velocity to be 0 and the robot to be at rest. So we basically want to solve for all of these. Once we have all of these, we can find out what is the acceleration, velocity and position at all instants of time for 0 to 5 seconds, right? Now, everything that we did earlier in that question, we are going to do it using MATLAB. So how we do it? We actually define the things. How we are defining? We are defining theta 0 to be 30°, theta f to be 90°. Just a second. Go through it, I'll be back. Okay. Initial time is 0, final time is 5 seconds. Initial velocity is 0, final velocity is 0. Okay, these are the things that we have defined. Now, we define time vector. Time vector is basically linearly placement of the vector of the time. So what we do, T0 is 0, Tf is 5 and this is 100. This means between 0 to 5 seconds, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. In all of these, we try to place 100 points. Linearly place 100 points between 0 to 5 seconds so that we have the time instances at particular interval. You can make this to be 1000, you can make it to be 10. If you make it to be 10, the things would not be that precise. If you make it to be more in number, it would be calculating at more number of time steps and you'll get a better curve, a better estimate. Okay, that is why. Now, what is this? This is basically your matrix. I don't know, it is not defined in this way in MATLAB. It has, so essentially it should be in this way. So it should be A is equal to this thing, then semicolon, then starts from here, then semicolon. It starts from here, then semicolon, it ends here and then a semicolon. So somehow I have got them here when I tried to copy it to PowerPoint. So yeah, this is your matrix. Now what is this matrix about? That I'll tell you. So your A is 1, T0, T0 square and T0 cube. Your 2 is, so we wrote 4 equations. Do you remember that? Just a second. So I'll tell you what it is. What is my theta t? It is a naught plus a1 t plus a2 t square plus a3 t cube. All right. So this is my first equation, because why it is my first equation? Because I'll be using it to relate it to theta 0 is equal to 0. Okay. So I am writing it to be in this form where I have just omitted the coefficients. So if I omit a naught, I'll get 1 plus if I omit a1, I'll get t. If I omit a2, I'll get t square. If I omit a3, I'll get t cube. And I'll tell you why I am doing this actually. So basically I am trying to omit all the coefficients because I want to take these coefficients in some other matrix. So I want to make my equation of this form: ax is equal to b. Okay. I want some matrix to be here. This to be a not a1, a2, a3, and then I want to have the final conditions placed over here, or the values to be placed over here. And then I want to find out, okay, what is this coefficient? What is my x? That is all I am trying to do here. Okay. So what I have done is, अभी पहला इक्वेशन जो है which would be theta 0 is equal to 0. So what I'll be doing? I'll be doing everything for initial time. So the thing will be 1 t t0 t0 square and t0 cube, right? Now in the second equation, I am doing everything for this. Theta 5 is equal to 90. So I'll do everything according to 5. And 5 where I have said? As TF. So I'll write 1 TF, TF square, TF cube. Alright. Now, after this, for this third equation, what I am doing? I am differentiating theta t. Because what is my third constraint? This is my third constraint for initial velocity. So what I need my equation for theta 2 to be differentiated. So I take this theta t and I differentiate it. So my theta dash t is 0 plus a1 plus 2 a2t plus 3a3 t square, right? So what I have done, I have removed all the coefficients and written the remaining things. So it is 0 for this, 1 for this, 2 for 2 into tf, sorry, 2 into t0 for this, and 3 into t0 square for this. Because my third is related to theta dash 0 is equal to 0. So everything I am doing is for t0 right now. I think I am clear with this. If there is any confusion, let me know. No confusion? Okay. Okay. Then in the fourth equation, what we have done, we are trying to solve this. Theta dash 5 is equal to 0. So what I want to do, I want to have everything this only, but just I want to use TF. So what I have done, 0, 1, 2 TF, 3 TF square. So this is my A matrix basically. तो जो मैंने यहाँ पे बोला ax is equal to b, this is my A matrix. Okay, what is my X matrix? This is this. What is my B matrix? This is this. Now what is my B matrix? B matrix basically is going to contain 30, 90, 0 and 0. That's all. 30, 90, 0, 0. These are the values stored here, right? So my A matrix is this matrix. B matrix is what I am getting as the final answer, and this matrix remains unknown, which basically constitutes of A0, A1, A2 and A3, and I want to find this X. That's all. Okay, so instead of solving the equations one by one that we solved manually, we are using the power of matrices here. Okay. So what we did, We basically defined an A matrix here. We defined our B matrix here. We wrote A naught to be coefficient, A2 to be some coefficient, A3 to be some coefficient, A4 to be some coefficient. Okay, now I think I missed a line over here. Just a second. I mean, where is the calculation? I have missed that, I think. Just let me see. Uh, yeah. No, I have missed the line. I have written over it. So how is the calculation? So the most important step is this one. This is the most important step. So what is being done here is I have tried to find out coefficient, which is basically A naught, A1, A2 and A3. And how I have done? I have found solution for this. So this A slash B, what it does is it returns a least square solution, or you can also say it has found the inverse to that side, to the system of equation Ax is equal to B. So what it has done, I'll tell you. It has taken this equation, it has found x to be A inverse of B. That's all it has done. So we are calculating A inverse B. From here we are obtaining, okay, my this coefficient is A inverse B. From here coefficient first term is A naught, second term is A1, the third term is A2 and the fourth term is A3. From here, yes, we have got all the equations. So from here we can calculate this trajectory. Now this trajectory is basically, a second. Yeah, this trajectory is basically your theta is equal to A naught. अभी तो A naught, A1, A2, A3 सब मिल गया. तो A naught plus A1 t plus A2 t square plus A3 t cube. Theta dot is differentiation. Theta double dot is again differentiation. So from here we have been able to find out what is the position, what is the velocity and what is the acceleration. Then it is just plotting of the results. Okay, कि एक figure लिया subplot में, because I want to plot all of them together. That is why I am using subplots, not three different figures. That is why I am using this subplot, so that I can have all the plots together at once. So position versus time, this is velocity versus time, this is acceleration versus time, and then I also want to display the coefficients. Okay, so see, this is a very simple way of doing things. You have the A matrix with you, you have the B matrix with you, just find out what are the coefficients that are common. I mean, you're solving a system of linear equations, right? So coefficients are going to remain same throughout the system of linear equations. You're just doing that. One more thing you can do to automate this process is, what I have done here is I have written theta t to be equal to this equation, then I have written theta dot to be equal to this equation. I can use Sims toolbox, as we had seen I think last time or last to last time. Sims toolbox where we use the symbols and we use to differentiate it. So you need not assign a scalar value to a symbol. Without that, अगर t है किसी भी equation में, we will differentiate it with respect to t without assigning some value. So we'll let the variable to stay as a symbol when we are doing all the calculation. Any differentiation, any integration, let it stay as a symbol and not be substituted by any value. For substituting a value at some later point, you can use this function subs. This is used for substitution. Alright. So I think this is clear. So from here, you have set up some initial and final conditions, position and velocity at the start and the end. You've also formulated a system of equations where you have solved for for cubic polynomial coefficients. You've computed the position, velocity and acceleration using the derived equations, and you have plotted all these results. So your expected output is your position should smoothly increase from 30 degree to 90 degree. Your velocity should start and end at zero, peaking midway. We'll see that. And acceleration should be a parabolic curve, ensuring a smooth motion. Okay. So I think this is what you got from there. Now, what is jerk? Any idea? What does this term mean? What is jerk? This is the last question we are taking today. I just want you to get well versed with MATLAB things also, because solving them is very easier here. You can't always take a pen and paper and keep on solving for a system of linear equations. Trajectory planning, you won't have time to solve each time, okay, what should be the coefficient so that I can reach from here to here. No, don't do that now. Okay, jerk is basically, so theta t is your position, right? Theta dot t is your velocity. Theta double dot t is your acceleration. Theta triple dot t is jerk. So I want to have a minimum jerk trajectory, which means I want to have a smoother motion. I don't want my acceleration to be rapidly increasing and rapidly decreasing. Agar, so what happened? When we solved the cubic spline method, initially we had initial velocity to be 0. We had final velocity to be 0. Right? We started from some initial position. We went to some final position. But in none of these, we had initial acceleration to be 0. I mean, at t is equal to 0, we said that we have an acceleration of 2 meter per second square. And we ended up saying that we have a deceleration at final time to be minus 2 meter per second square. Why did we do this? This should not happen, right? Acceleration, कोई भी particular acceleration को reach करने में, even when you start your car or your scooty or your bike, what happens is you start at t is equal to 0, your acceleration does not build up directly to that value. It takes some time. So it can be some linear curve to reach the particular acceleration, or it can be some parabolic curve. So something has to go in between. There has to be a ramp, right? It cannot be a direct movement ki I say directly that yeah, at t is equal to 0, my acceleration is 2 meter per second square. That is not possible, not at all. Okay. So in that case, this minimum jerk trajectory comes into place. When we don't want to have erratic movement at all, this minimum jerk trajectory plays an important role. All right. So, yeah, there is a robotic arm that moves from an initial position of 30 degree to final position of 90 degree in 5 seconds. These conditions remain the same. The initial and final velocities are 0. This again remains the same. There are additional 2 constraints. The initial and final acceleration also remain 0. Means we have 6 constraints in total. Right? We have 6 constraints in total, and how would those 6 constraints be taken into account? For that, just for that, we need to go with 5th degree polynomial, because the number of constraints have been increased to 6. Okay. So a minimum jerk trajectory is represented by a 5th degree polynomial, which is given by this equation. Theta t is equal to a0 plus a1t plus a2t square plus a3t cube plus a4t to the power 4 plus a5t to the power 5. Since jerk, which is a third derivative of position, is minimized, we impose the following constraints. Initial position, final position, initial velocity, final velocity, initial acceleration, final acceleration. We solve for these 6 coefficients. 6 coefficients we want to know. We have 6 constraints with us. will be able to solve, right? Again, it is going to be a solution of linear system of equations or system of linear equations. So yeah, just two more parameters have increased here and nothing else. It is similar to the last code. Then this A matrix has increased because we just have two more conditions over here. We would take triple derivative. Before this we were taking just two derivatives, right? Sorry, we were taking a single derivative. We had theta t, जिसके लिए दो constraint आ रहा था, theta dash t, because of which we were getting these two constraints. Now we'll have double differentiation to find out the acceleration, and acceleration is 0 at final and initial point. So we'll have these two conditions also. Okay. Now your B matrix is basically 6, which has initial and final position, initial and final velocity, initial and final acceleration. And these four are at least 0. We solve, we try to find the inverse. We find x to be equal to A inverse B, where these are my coefficients. Okay. When we find this, we get the 6 values of the coefficients. These 6 values of coefficients are put here. Theta is equal to A1 plus A2 to A5 wala thing. Theta dot, theta double dot, theta triple dot. This is your jerk. This is your acceleration. This is your velocity. And this is your position. Okay. Now, it is again just plotting of the things. This is your plot, position versus time. This is your velocity versus time. This is your acceleration versus time. This is your jerk versus time. And then we are also printing all of the coefficients that we have got. So what we did, we defined a fifth degree polynomial for minimum jerk. We set up the boundary conditions for position, velocity and acceleration at start and stop, which we were not able to do using cubic spline. So Bindu, this was your question, right? So that is why we need this now. So we were not able to do this using cubic spline, and now we have boundary conditions for position, velocity and acceleration, all of them at start and stop. Solve the system of linear equations to get coefficients from A0 to A5. Compute the trajectory for position, velocity, acceleration and jerk. Plot all the results. Expected output is position curve is smooth from 30 degree to 90 degree. Velocity curve starts and ends at 0, smooth peak. Acceleration curve, smooth transitions, avoiding sharp jumps. And jerk curve, smoothest possible profile, minimized jerk. Why should we go with minimized jerk? Because minimizing jerk ensures smooth motion, which reduces any vibration or erratic motion, better trajectory tracking for robotic arms, and it reduces wear and tear of motors and actuators. That is why we go with this. Now, I'll switch to MATLAB and I'll show you the results. Since you have already seen the code, I think we don't need to see the code once more. We'll see the results directly. So just let me change my window. Okay, now let me present to you. My entire screen is visible to you right now. Just a second. Let me move to MATLAB. I hope it is being recorded. Yeah. So, yeah. I'll reduce it. Okay. Okay. So you can see here, it is the same code, the simple trajectory planning code, in which the thetas and velocities are defined. Then it is lin space. Then what I am doing is, this line is the most important of all lines. This is basically finding the inverse, A inverse, and multiplying it with B. So yeah, this is used to solve the system of linear equations. Then I'm just plotting it. I'll show you the result. Okay, so you can see here in the command window, we have got A0 to be 30, A1 to be 0, A2 to be 7.2 and A3 to be minus 0.96. So these are the values we have got when we have solved for this system of linear equation. Now your position increases from 0 to 90 degree. Your velocity is initially 0 and at t is equal to 5 seconds also it is 0, but it maintains some velocity and then it comes to 0. It is definitely not a constant velocity. Your acceleration, basically it accelerates, then it starts from a particular acceleration, it goes to 0 and then it reduces, I mean it decelerates to reduce the velocity. So that is why your acceleration curve looks like this. So this was the first question that we did, where we wanted to fit a cubic spline to a single link manipulator. So from here you can get the values of A0, A1, A2, A3, and all the coefficients are present here. I hope this would be very helpful to you if at any point of time you are going to do trajectory planning. This is very helpful. Okay, now let's move to minimum jerk trajectory. What we did in minimum jerk trajectory, we defined initial and final acceleration as well. Okay, and then we said, so you saw in this case, the last case, right? Initial and final acceleration were not 0. It was close to minus 18 to, plus 18 to minus 18. Now let's see what happens. So here again we are plotting all of these and we are also getting the coefficient values. Let's see this. Okay. So when we did this, you can see we are getting A0 to be 30, A1 to be of very small order, which is approximately equal to 0, A2 to be also equal to 0, A3 to be 4.8, A4 to be minus 1.44 and A5 to be 0.1152. Now for position you can see it goes from 0 to 90, but it is smoother. It's not एक linear line fit किया है, it is a smoother curve. For velocity also you can see it does not move very rapidly, rather it's like it is settling and moving properly. For acceleration also it starts from 0. At t is equal to 0 you should not expect the acceleration to reach 18 meter per second square, which was the case earlier. Okay, it starts from 0, it maintains some value, it comes down to 0, then it again achieves minus 18 and it again comes down to 0. So if you have fit a curve which provides least vibrations, which least erratic motions, and then you are able to achieve the things properly, your jerk basically ranges from somewhat higher value, it might be approx 30 and it goes to minus 10 and it goes again to 30. So this is your minimum jerk trajectory. So you see how it is different from the cubic spline you had fit. अचानक से 18 meter per second square नहीं achieve करना है. It should go from 0 to 18, right? That is the way in which things are being planned over here. So minimum jerk trajectory proves to be a better fit as compared to cubic spline. But the thing is, you have to put more constraints. If there are more constraints, you can definitely not go with cubic spline, because the system would be overdetermined. You won't have a unique solution over there. But here, you can definitely do it, because you have this fifth degree polynomial. You have 6 unknowns and you have 6 constraints. Okay. I think everything is clear. If not, you can ask me any questions. Are there any questions that I need to address? Let all of the things sink in. You have these codes in your slides as well. So I'll definitely be uploading on the public sheet that is shared with you. So you can always see the codes and you can write it in your MATLAB. And yeah, one more thing. When I did this, na, I'm not using today. Whatever I did, this is not in the MATLAB app that I have, because currently not in my campus, and I'm not able to access my original MATLAB. So what I've done, I've used MATLAB online. So I've logged in, I used MATLAB online, I wrote the code over here, and I'm showing you the results over here. So it is not from the software as well. It is from MATLAB online. So whenever you want to practice the things, now use this MATLAB online. This is really helpful. So it helps you like to do all the things that is required. So MATLAB online is really a good tool to use. Please feel free to use this whenever you need. Okay. And yeah, with this we are done for today. And one there is another important announcement that I want to make. I know many students are not here, but the thing is that I might be not able to take the class next Monday because I'm traveling. So the next Monday's NPTEL session will be scheduled either on Saturday or Sunday or Tuesday. Any of the 3 days, I'm not sure about it. But yeah, I'll be asking the administrators to change the day. And yeah, accordingly, there will be an announcement definitely on the portal, and you'll get it over the mail as well. That is for sure. But yeah, just to give a heads up that I won't be able to take on next Monday. It would be some other day, Saturday, Sunday, or Tuesday, probably at the same time. It would be either 6 to 8 or 7 to 9. All right. So see you next week or probably this weekend. I'm not sure about it. So then we'll move ahead with the other chapters that you have. Please go through the lectures very well before you come next time, because these clarification of doubts would actually help you in solving your assignments. Okay. Okay. Have a good day. Bye bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.